Today we're going to talk about Chapter 2 in The Power of Critical Thinking by Dr. Lewis Vaughn, and I hope that I can help you understand the chapter a little better. It does have a lot in it. You can see by our agenda, and I ran out of space at the bottom. But there's a lot here, and there's a lot of good things to think about, and I'm just going to walk you through kind of how it works and what he does and some things to make sure you understand and look at. So, Chapter 2 is called Obstacles to Critical Thinking, and basically there are two different kinds of obstacles, psychological and philosophical. So the psychological, kind of how we think, and then the philosophical, what we think, everything can mess up, okay? We are fallible. We make mistakes. We get roped into things we wish we hadn't done. We do things or we don't do things we wish we would have done. Our decisions are important and difficult, and so we need to make sure that we are giving ourselves the best chance to make good decisions and believe good things, or at least correct things. We're going to look at obstacles, the self, ego, and not just in the kind of pop culture ego kind of stuff, but in how we think about ourselves and how that affects how we think about everything else. A few people to note: Francis Bacon, W.K. Clifford, and Bertrand Russell. Obstacles of the group. When it's groupthink, we all think the same way because we all think the same way because we're all in the same group. D. Harrison has some good things to say there. Social media, the big group. Group pressures and fallacies, prejudice and racism, and then a little bit of that by Lawrence Bloom, who is a critical race theory person. But anyway, we're going to do those. The toughest mental obstacles, what we do with evidence. Thomas Gilovich has something to say about that. Confirmation bias. Tom Nichols, who has a wonderful book. What is it? The Death of Expertise. I know, wonderful for philosophy type geeks, but that's okay. Your brain on social media. If you have ever seen the really old commercial PSA, your brain on drugs and the egg fried and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's what that's riffing on. One of the things in this section that I think is really important is the Dunning-Krueger effect. And then we have philosophical obstacles, things like relativism that really doesn't work. Everybody uses it, but it doesn't work. And so we're going to walk through that. And then, of course, you have at the end of this your Chapter 2 reading log and exercises and stuff to do. So I'm leaving critical thinking definition up on the board so we have it, because this is obstacles to critical thinking. So what gets in the way of us using systematic evaluation or formulation of beliefs or statements by rational standards? Now, we saw in Chapter 1 that there's a lot of work to do with that. And we don't have to do it for every single little tiny thing. But we should do it. We should put our beliefs up against critical thinking, look at the reasons for them, and make sure they're things that we really want to spend our time on, that we really want to believe, that we really want to put out there as part of our philosophy of life. We're going to talk about worldview a bit when we get to the philosophical obstacles. But one of the things, there are two big words in this chapter. There's a big list of keywords. I'm not writing on the board. On page 50. And two things that we need to have down pat, running around in our heads, is our worldview is a philosophy of life, a set of fundamental ideas that help us make sense of a wide range of important issues in life. Now, they're not specific beliefs at this stage. A worldview is your kind of, this is my filter, this is what I run everything through and make sure it makes sense, make sure I'm doing what I know is right, making sure that I'm believing things for the right reasons. And we're going to get some more of that again in the later chapter. But evidence, and I think this is really important because because we have the internet and we can look up anything we want. I mean, really, anything you want. It's out there somewhere, sometimes millions of times. And we can find all kinds of answers, but are they evidence? And evidence is something that makes a statement more likely to be true. Now, most of the time, what my students tell me is evidence is things that makes them, they believe it's more true. Okay, it's not a fact, or it's a fact from a very dubious source. And really, unless you're looking at real documents, and I don't know, that sounds kind of snobby. I like to read newsletters and opinion columns and just all kinds of different things. And some of them are way out there, either end of the spectrum. And so I know, just to kind of proportion my belief, maybe this is, I needed to read this today because I was taking something out of context and I didn't realize I was taking it out of context. Okay, well, there I am. I'm settled back in. We're all good. If your only resources for what you read every day or what you believe, what you're going to put in your head, basically, is Facebook and Snapchat and WhatsApp and whatever else is out there, or Reddit or Tumblr or whatever, you're not getting reliable truth here. You're not getting reliable sources. Now, a lot of those folks are experts. Okay, you have to do your due diligence and find out. Just because they sound important or they sound educated doesn't mean that they're an expert. And we're going to talk more about that in chapter 4, but a little bit here. So let's dive in a bit. Critical thinking happens in an environment. And because we are not infallible, we are fallible, there are 1,000 ways this can go bad, right? I used to always say 15-year-olds, but I think it's more these days, more like 10-year-olds in a room and ask them what they believe about X. Okay, so what do you think is the cause of the coronavirus? You will get some interesting answers. Now, the younger you go, the more you can hear them parroting parents and sometimes making a big mess of it. Not always, but sometimes. So we know that we have this difficult way to go here, right? We've got to figure this stuff out, and then we've got to figure out if what we believe is actually true, okay? Actually has any reason for it, has any support and any evidence. And so we have to work. And we don't like to work. I mean, in general, we don't like to work. So we have to have the right kind of motivation. And we also have to have a little bit of practice, okay? Yeah. One of the things that comes up a lot is this idea of the self, okay? Now, depending upon what generation you're in, how you were brought up, where you were brought up, what your ideals are, who you are, what the self means to you, is in varying ways kind of hierarchy. So where do you fit? What do you do for yourself that might be getting in the way of your critical thinking? Okay. Francis Bacon late 1500s, early 1600s, so 17th century. This is the beginning of what we call the Age of Enlightenment and all that fun stuff. He had a theory about how we make mistakes and how we get in our own way of, following truth, learning more about the world, learning more about ourselves, learning more about God, whatever. And he said that what we do in our lives should focus on the careful pursuit of reliable knowledge. Okay? Careful pursuit of reliable knowledge. Now, I would say most of us don't do that. But if we were 17th century philosophers, we would. And we can do more of that, obviously. It would be good for us and good for our world. He said that there were certain mistakes that people made consistently that could be traced back to what he called the idols of the mind. Okay, so Francis Bacon, idols of the mind. And we don't do too much with this word outside of Old Testament kind of stuff. But I would argue we all make things to be worshipped. And we're not talking about, I'm not talking about all the rites, R-I-T-E-S, and all of that kind of stuff that go along with religion. I'm talking about things that we set up to be important enough in our lives that we pay attention to them on a daily basis. Okay? He says the idols of the mind, and he calls them idols because he said these are things that we revere, we pay attention to, we spend our time on, and we need to be careful. Okay? I think I'm going to use this guy because, like I said, the book is heavy. I took notes. Okay. So he has 4 of them. One is idols of the tribe. And this word is coming up more and more these days about finding your own tribe, looking at maybe not blood-related family, but folks who think like you, folks who do what you do, whether it's your job or your avocation or whatever, hobbies, things like that. Where's your tribe? Okay, he says it's human nature. The fallacy of presuming that our biased perceptions are automatically a true reflection of objective world, that knowledge is to be found inside us without any reference to the real world. Okay, so this thing is basically human nature. And the long and short of it is what we perceive is true. And I'll add, regardless of whether it really is. Okay, what we perceive is true. We don't have to go out of anywhere but ourselves to figure out what's true and what's best and what's wonderful. Now, sometimes we might get it right. Most of the time, though, not so much. Okay? The second is he calls idols of the cave. And he is referencing Plato there a little bit. These are biases unique to each person. He said, we each live in our own cave, which refracts and discolors the light of nature. Okay? So these are biases unique to each person. Now, we pick these up along our lives. Some of them come straight from our family, parents, siblings. Some of them come from our education, where, when, and how kind of things. Some come from our culture around us, but these are things that we are sure of, but they're not really true. Third, idols of the marketplace. Okay, are from our imprecise and careless use of language. He says, the ill and unfit choice of words wonderfully obstructs the understanding. Okay, so this is problems with language. And understanding. And he calls it marketplace because where do we have problems with language? When we go outside of our own tribe, our own home, our own cave, and we interact with others. Because what we think of when we say the word dog is different from what the guy here thinks is dog, that thinks is dog. Somebody pictures their cute little Yorkie, little bows in her hair and everything. Some, it's a Mastiff, they're 150 pounds and all that kind of fun stuff. Or a Newfoundlander or something like that. Dog is a big category. So are most of the things we think we have down pat. This class is a monument to that in a way. What we call an argument is not what you would term an argument necessarily outside class. Okay? But problems with language and understanding. Anytime we interact with another person, because they can't see our thoughts directly, there's a chance for misunderstanding. And we're always going to prefer our own. That's the problem. Last one, idols of the theater. Ideologies and systems of thought that are but so many stage plays representing worlds of their own creation after an unreal and scenic fashion. They have little or nothing to do with the real world, but are nevertheless thought to be accurate and profound. Okay? So this is with the theater, this is problems of ideologies. That's a big word. We gotta, well, not my kind of big word. There we go again. Problems of ideologies. Ideologies are the ways we think about something. Okay? These are told to be absent of the real world, but we're pretty sure we're in the real world. Okay? So they go from big to tiny to big again, as far as their scope. So idols of the tribe, we're looking at problems that we particularly have. Now remember, this is all under the self here. Okay? So idols of the tribe, human nature. Everybody does this. What we perceive as true. I saw that. And we're going to talk a little bit in chapter 4 about the experience of eyewitnesses. Okay. Idols of the cave. Things that we have internalized so much that they are specific to us. Now, other people may have the same ones, but not in the same order and not in the same range. Okay. Idols of the marketplace. Problems when we step out into the world in communication. And this goes for advertisements and propaganda and all that kind of stuff as well. But this is particularly for us. When these things happen, we always choose us. Me. Okay? And then the idols of the theater are problems with our ideologies. We think a certain way. We have a certain ism in the back of our head. Okay? Feminism. That one always comes because that's part of mine. Think about just all the different ways people think about politics, okay? And not just Democratic, Republican, but all the different layers and such. Those are some of your ideologies. And when we think we're right, or we just assume that we're right, it's going to cause problems when we're trying to critical think, when we're trying to interact with other people, all of that. Okay? That leads us to this idea of self-interested thinking. Self-interested thinking is when we base our beliefs, base our arguments totally on what's good for us. Now, egoism, ethical egoism, all of those things have a little bit to do with figuring out what's best for us but that doesn't cost other people. And this is part of, that life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. All of those things are rights, human rights, as long as your rights don't squash all over somebody else's. Okay, part of being a grown-up, part of being a rational, reasonable human being is knowing that you are not the center of the universe. And so when somebody else wants to do something, you have to think, okay, if I say no, you cannot possibly do this. What am I saying about my own stuff? Okay, so if, and this was, I told you guys in the intro video that I didn't start my undergrad until I was 27. So I was in grad school, well, PhD school in University of Oklahoma, and I was almost 40. 10 years later, 37. And so I wasn't from Oklahoma. I hadn't been to Oklahoma. So I signed up to live in the dorms for my first year there as a grad student. So I was teaching English 111 and 112, and I was living in the dorms with, the big deal, quiet hours. Okay, if you've ever lived in communal housing for whatever thing, your family at home maybe, roommates, the dormitories. Anyway, we had, I chose the house that I was living in because the stated quiet hours were 6 a to 6 p. Or no, 6 p to 6 a, sorry. 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. Great for me. I have a bunch of immune problems and pain problems and all that. I need sleep. So the first house meeting we had, they voted. I was definitely outvoted. They changed the quiet hours to midnight to noon, and I dissented. So I had to work around that. I had to find a way to work within those parameters and still get enough sleep and all that. So I took a nap. Most of the folks in the dorm did not get loud until 7 or 8 o'clock. I could sleep until 7 and get up and go have dinner and then come back and work until midnight and still be able to get up at 6 because I taught class at 7:30. Anyway, so when you're looking at living with other people and kind of coexisting, we have to be aware that our ego and their ego are not the same. And so equality is a big deal, right? Egalitarianism. So self-interested thinking accepts claims based solely on the grounds that it advances or coincides with our interests. And now it's not necessarily bad, and you should have some claims, of course, that are in your best interest. But if that's your only reason for doing something, it benefits me. It's bad. Okay, can be bad, can be problematic. One, because it's not based on evidence, and two, because it leaves us open to propaganda and manipulation. If something sounds good for us, we're all for it. It may backfire badly. I know folks who, put their life savings in a hoax, who, moved cross country to join whatever, and there was nothing there. Everything that sounds too good to be true probably is. You know that already. How can we guard against this? Self-interested thinking, okay? Well, watch out when things get too personal. If you have a strong emotional reaction to this claim, back up, try again. See where that's coming from, see if that's actual or if it's something that, is not good for you. One of the little further thought things is it wrong to believe without good reasons? W.K. Clifford says it is morally wrong to believe a proposition without justification or evidence. And this is on page 30. Belief without evidence is immoral because our actions are guided by our beliefs, and if our beliefs are unfounded, our actions, including morally relevant actions, are likely to be imprudent. Okay, imprudent, not good for us in the long run, not good for anybody else either. Okay. Self-interest gets in the way when we have a big personal stake in the conclusions we reach. So if you're deeply committed to the party line, okay, you're deeply committed to opposing a particular other party line. Those two things get in the way a lot. And I would say for most folks, if they're honest with themselves, even if they are staunch, dyed-in-the-wool Republicans, there are things that folks in the Republican Party do or platform pieces that they have they don't necessarily agree with. That's good, okay? Look at what you believe. Look at how these things are influencing your life, and that way, you can make better decisions. Bertrand Russell, name was up there on the agenda. He says, the opinions that are held with passion are always those for which no good ground exists. Indeed, the passion is the measure of the holder's lack of rational conviction. The dead giveaway that you are skewing your thinking is a surge of strong emotion. So it's not that you can't be passionate and that you can't be on fire for whatever this particular cause is. Just make sure you're doing it for the right reasons, okay? And that those reasons are well supported and actually do pay off, okay? Benjamin Disraeli says, to be conscious that you are ignorant is a great step to knowledge. This is something that I think most of us need to take more stock in. It's very easy to feel superior for our knowledge. It's also very easy to be taken wrongly when other folks around you think that you are taking too much pride in your knowledge. Emotions are a good part of being human, but when your emotional response is the only reason for accepting a claim, we're out of balance. Okay, balance. Okay, all hail my group. I don't know how many of you are Trekkies, have ever seen the stuff with the Borg. Absolutely frightening. Total loss of personality and all of that in subjection to the hive mind. Okay. We resist their kind of scrunch on us because we say we love independence, we want to be our own people, we want to be our own person, we want to belong, though, too. Conformist tendencies are a fact of life. But when the only reason we hold a belief is because we're afraid to let go of it because of what it might say about us to our group, okay? We want to belong. That's why we have sororities and fraternities. That's why we have associations for, name a profession. That's why we have, in large part, why we have churches and why we have, the DFW hall or whatever. We like to belong with other humans. And, why we have a book group, why we have, social media, all that stuff. But we have to be careful, okay? We have to be careful when our conformism hampers or obliterates our critical thinking, okay? So groupthink, according to Guy Harrison, is the common and dangerous tendency to fall in line and agree, even when we should know better, okay? Social media puts this on steroids, okay? Blows it up. We tend to agree or like things within groups that we post in, within our different groups on there. Sometimes even the dubious stuff. We just like it because, Jenny said it was wonderful. You have no idea, but you don't want to offend Jenny, so you click the button. Sometimes, though, Even silence is a nod to acceptance, okay? Most people go along to get along. And there's nothing wrong with that in some cases. But when that's our only reason for something, and you'll hear that's the problem, right? When self-interested thinking is our only reason for doing something, when fear of the group or desire to be a part of the group is the only reason we're accepting something, that we gotta look at that. Group pressure often leads to fallacies. Now, a fallacy is the name of a particular way of doing something that really doesn't work. Okay, and so when we have fallacies in an argument, we're saying or doing something that is totally counterproductive, or we're doing it to kind of blow smoke. Okay. Peer pressure. These are from the closest to us in age, status, position, etc. So it's called peer pressure, pressure from equals, to be like the rest of them. Okay. Now, I know everybody is all about being individual and doing things that are from prior generations kind of looked askance at. Tattoos is a big deal. If you ask, probably your great grandmother now, how many people she knew growing up had tattoos? Maybe one. And they were probably not considered to be the best person. These days, if you don't have ink, you're weird. I'm weird. Appeal to popularity, appeal to the masses. Based on the sheer number of people who believe this, we think it's true. Doesn't always work that way, okay? Even in very mild and banal stuff. Like this thing I found out the other day. I have always heard that humans really only use about 10% of our brains. I think maybe most of you have heard that too. Totally wrong. We use most of our brains most of the time, like 85 to 90% of our brains, just to walk across the floor. I had no idea. Anyway, appeal to common practice or tradition. We've always done it this way. Well, that's not a good enough reason to keep doing it. Now, there are things we do for tradition that are worth our time, and we should do them, or it's nice when we do them. We always used to buy my mom a flat of plants for Mother's Day, and then we spent the afternoon putting them in, making sure everything was all cool. That's a tradition that we held until she passed, Mother's Day, okay? That kind of tradition, not a big deal. Now, this is the way we've always done it, is really problematic when you're talking about any kind of human interaction, okay? So we've always treated this group this way, and this group this way, and this group, no. Even if you're in the group that particular answer or practice preferences, it's not good for you, okay? Everybody has to have that same consideration, that same level of respect, and a whole bunch of other things that go with it. Be careful when that's the only reason. The pressure of presuming that our own group is the best, the right one, and all the rest don't count. Okay. We have things called prejudice, a negative or adverse belief about others without sufficient reason. Okay. We tend to believe the things we grew up with and assume that our beliefs are better than anyone else's. This pressure can lead to wishful thinking, rationalization, and self-deception. And worst of all, violence. We've seen that in recent years here in the States. It's one thing to hold a belief that your particular group, whether that group is based on age or skin color or religion or whatever, is good. It's another thing to take that and say, well, mine is good, then nobody else's matters. Or even worse yet, those who don't belong in my group don't deserve the same kinds of consideration that we do. Even worse, they should be killed. And if you think I'm going too far, just think about the Holocaust and Nazi Germany. Millions of people were killed because they didn't fit an ideal. Bizarre when we think about it critically, but that's where we go. Stereotyping is classifying individuals into groups according to oversimplified or prejudiced attitudes or opinions. Remember, if we have certain beliefs solely because they were given to us by our parents, by our social, by whatever, they are not really our beliefs. Okay? One other thing I want to remind folks of, too, is don't beat yourself up for things you didn't understand before you looked into them. Now, you may need to do some apologizing and some reconciliation, but if you didn't know, you didn't know. Okay? Now, I'm not saying that the folks back in history didn't know that what they were doing was wrong. I think they knew, and they still did it because of this, but also because of money. Money gets in the way a lot. And if you don't think so, you haven't been paying attention. The only way to counter the outsized influence of the group is to achieve an impartial stance and proportion your belief to the strength of the reasons. Now, it's hard to be impartial. It's hard to be objective. We have to kind of work at it in order to get there at all. So be careful with that. There's a couple of things in there that you will like in the for further thinking. When we construct the facts ourselves, and then the one that's really important, though, is this one with Lawrence Bloom. Racism is group thinking at its worst. But what is it? There are things that people call racism that aren't. Racism is like the worst of prejudice and bias and stereotyping. And so racism begins, this is Lawrence Bloom, racism begins with the belief that races exist and can be differentiated by significant moral, intellectual, or cultural differences. Now, if you ask a biologist, do races exist in Homo sapiens sapiens, okay? They're going to tell you that really no. You cannot tell by, bones in a gravesite or whatever that these people were of a particular race. I mean, obviously, if they're found in Africa or China, probably got a good chance of that. But part of the problem here is that we have taken very superficial differences and turned them into the end-all be-all, okay? Now, I can no more help being a freckled white girl than my dear friend can not be black, okay? She has a lot more melanin in her skin than I do. Melanin. Anyway, things that never occurred to me were huge deals for her. And it's the same thing, though, between men and women and all that in the middle. It's a hard thing to understand somebody else's oppression when you are, unwittingly or not, part of that oppressive group. It's really hard to break that down and be objective. I think, more importantly, let's break that down and be compassionate. Be kind first, and if there are negative repercussions from that, that's kind of okay. Okay, so Lawrence Bloom says, for racism to follow, this differentiation and all of that, is the addition of the belief that, one,
Some races are inferior to others in important respects. And 2, some races deserve disdain, hatred, or hostility. Okay, so Bloom calls these 2 factors inferiorization and antipathy. All forms of racial ills should elicit concern from responsible and reasonable individuals. Okay, when we see it, regardless of what we look like, we need to call it out and help bring reconciliation. That's part of our jobs as humans. Right? Okay, the toughest mental obstacles: denying contrary evidence, looking for confirming evidence, motivating evidence, or preferring available evidence. Now, this section is pretty short, very important though. So, evidence, something that makes a statement more likely to be true. It does not mean something that I feel or perceive as true. And we're going to have all kinds of discussions about that word as we go through all the chapters pretty much. So if we have a particular stance, okay, we tend to dismiss evidence that we don't agree with, and we will overly scrutinize contrary evidence and poke holes in it in ways we would never do with stuff that we agree with. Happens. So there's Thomas Gilovich. Did I put his name up here? Yeah, evidence. They did a study, and it's been replicated multiple times since. Folks who were adamantly pro-capital punishment and folks who were adamantly against capital punishment were shown the same sets of evidence. And each group rated the evidence they agreed with as a well-conducted piece of research that provided important evidence, but the evidence for the other side as having numerous flaws. The participants cognitively transformed it into evidence that was considered relatively unimportant and could be assigned little weight. So they're all looking at the same stuff. These folks say, this is a good study, it's wonderful, it's done all their good things. This one's really bad. The guys on the other side are saying, oh, this is wonderful evidence, and look at how great this is. That's really bad, it's not well done. You don't even have to listen to that. So, who's right? Probably neither. The only remedy here is to make a conscious effort to look for opposing evidence. Basic principle of scientific work is not to accept a favored theory until competing or alternative theories are thoroughly examined. So you have to basically do your opponent's work for them. Go look at the other evidence. Does it have any bearing on what you're doing? Honestly. Does it need to be looked at? Does it mean that I need to revise what I'm doing, what I'm saying is true? Does it mean that I need to kind of weigh my own choices as evidence? Yes, all the above. There's something called confirmation bias as well. When we are looking at sources, and this is very common when I'm teaching English 111 or 112, students will have 6 or 7 articles to look at, and only 2 of them really agree with them. They just kind of shove the others off to the side. Or they use things out of context or whatever. We want to keep the stuff that we agree with and dismiss or kind of dumb down the things that we don't. It's also known as cherry-picking evidence. Tom Nichols, author of The Death of Expertise, says, confirmation bias makes attempts at reasoned argument exhausting because it produces arguments and theories that are non-falsifiable. It is the nature of confirmation bias itself to dismiss all contradictory evidence as irrelevant. And so my evidence is always the rule. Your evidence is always a mistake or an exception. You have to be careful. Careful. The other piece here is we need to think about motivated reasoning. things that we do because we have a hidden agenda, okay? And this is going to play into our expert work later. If you're getting paid to do or be something, and you find out that that particular something is less than desirable, less than true, less than helpful, it's really difficult to kind of undo yourself and get out of there. I had a situation at a private school I was working at that me and the headmaster really saw this event in two very different ways, and I couldn't reconcile it. I thought it was racial bullying. He didn't think it was anything, and that basically they should just get over it. I quit my job. I just can't do that kind of work if that's what everybody assumes is true. It was rough. It was weird. I hate to quit jobs. I hate to quit, period. But when you know that the fundamental philosophy of an institution or of a company or whatever is contrary to what you believe is true and right, you really don't have a choice but to leave. It's just how it works, how it should work anyway. Okay, so we have a few other pieces here. Availability error. Availability error is you pick, okay, so you do a Google search. We've all done Google search. Found out there was a black vulture in my neighborhood the other day. Google search. So we do a Google search and we look at the first three pieces that show up. We don't go any further than that. We base our whole opinion, whole paper, whole whatever on these first three because they're first. Problem is, those first three probably paid to be the first three. They might not be expert opinions. They might not be experts at all. And so it leads us to one of the biggest fallacies out there, which is hasty generalization. When we draw a conclusion about a whole group based on an inadequate sample of that group. Okay, it's how we get to prejudice. Okay, prejudice is a type of hasty generalization, and we do it all the time. We do it for lots of reasons, and we have to be careful if we're talking about how this works in the real world. We need to be careful about making hasty generalizations so that, one, we don't look like idiots. Two, we're being fair to all those people involved. And three, so that when we think about what we're doing, we can understand and know that we did a good thing. Okay. When you're hasty about things, it doesn't always work. Haste makes waste. Okay, your brain on social media. There's this word, and I love words. Homophily. Okay? So this is basically believe in a claim if it comes from a friend. Okay? So Phil is love, same love. It's not that kind of same love. But this is accepting a claim simply because it comes from your friend. And by friend, it can also be somebody that you highly admire. When a celebrity takes a stance on something that they have no reality on, it's kind of like that. People believe them because they have this person as an idol or whatever. But homophily, I think that's a nice word. On social media. Okay, now I'm on Facebook. I know I'm an old person and that's what I do, but that's okay. I'm on Facebook. That's the only one I use, really. I have a Pinterest account, but that's a black hole waiting to suck you in. So is Facebook most days. But so mere exposure effect. The idea that just being exposed repeatedly to words or images, even without registering them consciously, can induce a favorable or comfortable feeling towards them, whether or not there's any good reason for doing so. And there's a couple of studies out there when they've done things with foreign words and different things that show just because you've seen it before might mean you like it. Yeah. Daniel Kahneman he won a Nobel Prize in economics, okay? Did work on this effect. Michigan State had this experiment with words in the paper, okay? It works without our conscious awareness. It occurs even when the repeated words or pictures are shown so quickly that the observers never become aware of having seen them. They still end up liking the words or phrases or pictures that were presented more frequently, okay? Just because they've seen it more times. Illusion of truth. Lies repeated many times are taken as truth simply because they are repeated. Okay? A false claim can be seen as a true claim simply because it's familiar. Oh, I've heard that before. Like the idea about 10% of your brain. Wrong. False consensus. This is really something that I think is a Facebook phenomenon more so than probably some of the others. The tendency to overestimate the degree to which other people share our opinions, attitudes, and preferences. Thinking that many others agree with us gives us confidence that we are right. Reasonable, smart, worthy, sane, all those things. It can make us pig-headed. Everybody does it this way. Again, tradition in that way is a fallacy. We hold on when we shouldn't. We are less likely to give them up when confronted with solid evidence and reasoning to the contrary. That's the big problem. When somebody shows us that what we've been thinking most of our lives is actually false, it's hard to let go. And I'm not just talking about things like religion. I'm talking about things that you thought were true, I don't know, forever, like the 10% of your brain thing. I know that that's false, but it's still kind of comforting, you know? Okay. The one I did put down there, the Dunning-Krueger effect. And you all are going to laugh and think, oh yeah, I've seen people do this. This is the phenomenon of being ignorant of how ignorant we are, okay? The dumber you are, the more confident you are that you're not actually dumb. That's what they call the Dunning-Krueger effect. People who don't know much about a given set of cognitive, technical, or social skills tend to grossly overestimate their prowess and performance. Okay? So this is the idea that reading a couple articles and doing a Google search or whatever makes you an expert, or at least equal to experts. Okay? This is hard. Knowing things is not the same as understanding them. Comprehension is not the same thing as analysis. Expertise is not a parlor game played with factoids. So how can we avoid this? Understand that everyone does this, even you, even me. And so take a moment to pause before speaking, writing, clicking, liking, or swiping prior to declaring the obvious answer. Confidence is not the same thing as knowledge. Now, we all know folks who think they are an expert on everything. Everybody has an uncle. Usually it's an uncle. Not very often an aunt, but usually it's an uncle who just will spout on anything. And when you're a kid, you think, oh, wow, they really know stuff. This is cool. And then you start learning stuff on your own. You think, that's not right. What the? Oh, anyway. There's the further thought thing is the backfire effect. And I've heard this one too. People who are very sure of their position on any given whatever, that if they find facts that run counter to their ideology, they tend to double down, create counter arguments that push them farther away from the truth. In reality, most folks are intellectually lazy and instead just ignore the new facts. Okay, so the effect is really the same, except that, you know, in what we call the backfire effect, you're doing the work to make it worse. And in reality, most of the time, people are just ignoring the new facts. Wow, almost an hour. I'm sorry. Philosophical obstacles. This is where we get our worldview definition, page 47. A philosophy of life, a set of fundamental ideas that help us make sense of a wide range of important issues in life. Okay. Now, the big deal here at the end of the chapter is the idea of relativism. Okay. Now, we like the sound of relativism. Everybody is equal. All of their decisions and ideas are right for them. That's how it works. Well, actually, this boils down to the idea that truth depends upon what someone believes. And if you really think about what that sentence means, it can't be true. Truth is a thing that is real and right and correct in all ways, in all places. Okay? Truth is truth, right? Now, truth cannot be relative. So then how can what one society, to make it a little bit bigger, holds as true, not be true in other societies? Okay? If this were correct, the Nazis had every right to do the Holocaust. They thought it was right. Their ideas are just as good as ours. Please do not take that out of context. It's wrong. It's always wrong. It will ever be wrong. It was wrong then, it's wrong now. Truth cannot be relative. Objective truth is about the world, about the way it is, regardless of what we may believe about it. So if we can make a statement true just by believing it to be true, we would be infallible. We could never be wrong. Nobody believes that, not really. You can't do that. And the other part of this is, if we say all truth is relative, so is that statement. And that makes it false. So we have subjective relativism, which is each person has its own truth. Social relativism, each society has its own truth. And then we have kind of the other side of the spectrum here, skepticism. It's good to be a skeptic of certain things or be skeptical of certain things. Oh, you give me $2, I can make you 200 in 2 days. Be skeptical. Okay, if it sounds too good to be true, probably is. So in skepticism, in this particular philosophical skepticism, we human beings know much less than we think we do, or nothing at all, because they're basing what we know to be true, as things that are beyond any doubt. Okay, and that's not how it works, right? We know certain things that we cannot do justice to providing evidence for. I know I was born. Obviously, I was there, right? Can I actively remember being born? No. No. I don't think anybody can. Can you absolutely know that it's, I don't know, daytime or before lunch or whatever? There's lots of things that we know because that's how the world works. And we're not absolutely sure of. Now, for good thing for us, critical thinking only needs us to be reasonable doubt, okay, beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's what we base our law system on and all that, beyond a reasonable doubt. If reasonable people who've had time to think about and research and judge believe that this is how it works, okay, we're good. We don't have to go beyond that, okay? knowledge requires that an idea or concept or assumption be beyond just a reasonable doubt. Okay, I used to do this with my 8th graders, and my apologies to the men watching this, but 8th grade boys are weird. The rule was, this is a different private school that I was teaching at. The rule was, reasonable behavior. Well, what's reasonable behavior? And my point to them was, if you would get in trouble with your grandma, you shouldn't do it. They're like, oh, okay. Well, that puts a damper on some things. Helps a little bit for a little bit of time. So, chapter 2, lots and lots and lots of stuff. My apologies for the length of this. You can watch half and I keep saying that at the end of things. I should say this at the beginning. This is going to be long, and we go on. You do have chapter 2 reading log. Make sure it's at least a page. You should have no trouble. No trouble. I think I have 10 pages for chapter 2. Then the exercises, again, make sure you're doing what you need to do. Yes, okay. Let me know if you have questions. You have my email. On we go. Have a good day.